Hi, I'm Martin Ranscombe, and I'm lucky enough today to get the opportunity to review and play 7 of Natal's snare drum range. What we've got today are all 14 by 5.5 snare drums. They've all got the same features, which include 2.3mm hoops, 10 lugs, which on snares of this price range is very good. The 3-way snare strainer, so you can have it off, obviously, on, and also a kind of intermediate setting. And we have some quality snare wires, which is also really important at this price point. Very often manufacturers will provide a decent drum and then really cheap snare wires, which don't do it any justice. So that's a really good feature. And another really small but really cool feature is these True Tune tension rods. Now you might think, well, what's so special about those? Well, they have this little bit of on the end. Hope you can see that's red. It's dipped in nylon, and the idea of that is once you've tuned up your snare drum, what the tension you want, they'll actually stay in place. They've also got a little spring washer that helps with that as well. Now, what I really like about that though is that if you have any other device, something that you might have put on the top of the tension rod that locks the tuning in place, that's cool. But then, of course, once you've done that, you've got to take them off to then retune the snare drum or change it. And most drummers, we tend to be kind of constantly tweaking, So it's really cool to have this because you can tune on the fly and it actually works, it stays in place. So that's really cool. So that's the general features that all the drums you're going to see today have got. So the 7 shells. Okay, we've got Birch Ply, Maple Ply, Bubinga Ply, that's the 3 wood drums, and then 4 metal drums. We've got 2 which are hammered steel, 1mm thick shells, one with this, what I'm holding here, the old bronze finish, and another with a copper finish, and then 2 straight, or flat if you like, brass and phosphor bronze snares. So it's a pretty good selection, and I was thinking you should all go out and get them all at once. No, but definitely worth checking out, and hopefully you'll see from the playing section, you'll hear the different sounds between all of them. Some of them may be very subtle, but different nonetheless. So hope you enjoy that, and yeah, check them out. Okay, so we're going to start with the Birch Ply snare drum, and this one is in a rather sexy sunburst fade, which is rather nice. But like I said at the beginning, this has the same spec, so we're looking at 2.3mm hoops. Each snare drum has 10 lugs with the fabulous sun logo on them, and our 3-way snare position, so off, on, and slightly looser if you want that kind of sound. With Birch, people talk a lot about being kind of pre-EQ'd and not so ringy and that kind of thing. Well, of course, a lot does depend on how you're tuning it. And talking of that, with all these snare drums, I've got the same tuning more or less for every single one, so that we can hear, hopefully, at least you can pick up the characteristics of the changes. So, as I say, with a Birch drum, you should be looking for a fairly kind of closed focus sound, not too much ring unless you kind of really crank up the top head. And this is what I would call a medium weight or medium thickness shell, which tends to give you the most versatility in terms of tuning. Okay, so we'll hear this drum later on in the playing section, and hopefully you'll be able to pick out the characteristics of it then. Okay? Okay, next up is the Maple Ply snare drum. Again, same spec, same snare throw-off, True Tune lug, tension rods and so on. But being maple and the same sort of thickness of shell, you should be getting a slightly more open sound, as people regard it as, or slightly more ring. That's one of the qualities of maple, but it might also give you a slightly more mellow sound. Again, a lot is down to tuning, but one of the things I like about this whole series from Natal is the fact that you do have this consistency. They all have that 10 lugs, same hoops, so you can, if you're lucky enough to be able to buy all of them, which of course I recommend you do, then you'll have a nice selection of sounds by having consistency though within the product range, which is really nice. Okay, so that's our maple, and we'll hear that one later on. Next up will be one of my favourites actually, which is the Bubinga shell. Okay, now we have the favourite, I guess, of mine anyway in the selection, which is this beautiful natural Bubinga Ply Snare drum. I know lots of people don't really like necessarily the whole wood finish thing, but I do, and I think it's gorgeous. But what are you going to get sound-wise? Well, Bubinga is a much denser, harder wood than maple or birch, so it gives you a little bit more cut and volume, slightly harsher sound, some may say. And I really like Bubinga for the kind of stuff I do, but it would be perhaps a little kind of brash sounding for some of the more mellow types of playing. But I wouldn't discount it. These drums will tune very well and you can get quite a good range out of them. So worth checking out, if only for the finish alone. So once again, just got to reinforce the point. 10 lugs, true tune, tension rods, three-way snare drum, snare release, sorry. But otherwise, yeah, a really nice drum, nice addition to the selection and well worth checking out. Right, now we have the first of two hammered steel shells. This one is the old bronze finish. It's a 1mm thick rolled steel shell. Again, with the same parts like the 10 lugs, three-way snare and so on. Now, hammering is an interesting process for snare drums because if you think in terms of cymbals, we normally associate those with being hammered, and the effect is similar in that if you take a steel shell or a brass, whatever metal, whatever the characteristic is of that, once you hammer it, you kind of what we call darken or soften it slightly. So although this is a steel shell, it won't have the same brightness and perhaps in some people's minds, mine included, slight harshness that you get with steel. It's a much kind of warmer, slightly drier sound. So again, worth checking that out because if you've ever tried a flat steel shell and you're not that keen, think again, try out one of these and you might be pleasantly surprised. Okay, we're on to the second of the hammered snare drums now. Still a steel shell, 1mm, but this time with a copper plated finish. So it's still going to have some of the characteristics of steel, but again, because of the hammering, just like our cymbal concept, it's going to make it a little bit more mellow, slightly darker sounding. It'll take out some of the harshness and a little bit of volume. But if I'm going to choose a metal snare drum, which to be honest I don't do very often if I'm being absolutely honest about it, I'm a big fan of wooden snares, but if I was going to, I do tend to like hammered shells because of that slight softening and mellowness of the shell. Kind of takes it a bit more in between, say, a plywood shell and a metal shell. So, but being steel, it still has some of that kind of cut, but you will lose a little bit of volume and a bit more warmth, which is not necessarily a bad thing. Okay, now we have the straight brass shell. It's a 1mm rolled shell, and brass is a very musical metal. It should be fairly obvious. We talk about brass bands. Most brass instruments are made out of brass for a reason. Yes, you can get other materials, of course, but essentially brass is associated with being sonically very pure. And so if you talk to some people, they'll say that all your attachments should be brass and that kind of thing. Well, we can't go that far, but again, it has the same specification: 10 lugs, true tune, tension rods, three-way snare release, but a straightforward seamed brass shell. And you're going to get slightly more ring, but it won't be as harsh and as bright as steel, but it'll have a bit more life, a bit more kind of zest to it. And that's one of the things that's nice about brass snare drums. A lot of people swear by them, of course. And it could be argued that certain names I can't mention, most famous snare drums are made of brass. So always check out a brass snare drum. Even if you're not necessarily into metal snares, it might be a good alternative. Give that real kind of warm brightness, very musical. Okay, so definitely check out the brass one. And finally, we have possibly one of my favourites, the Phosphor bronze shell. Again, it's a roll seamed shell. Phosphor bronze, what do you get with it? Lots of people have been talking about it. It's become very popular in recent years. So why? Well, first of all, most cymbals are made out of bronze, so that might give you a bit of a clue. If you compare it to other types of metal, particularly steel and brass, again it tends to be a lot more mellow, a lot warmer sounding, perhaps a little drier, a bit more focused, again depending on the tuning and the head you use. But it has a very musical sound again. You won't tend to get a sense of great volume out. Actually, they tend to be actually quite loud, but because they haven't got the harshness you get with, or brightness if you like, you get with steel and brass, there's a sense that it's not, but actually they really do cut very well, particularly in recording. So again, if you're doing a lot of recording or a lot of work where you have close microphones and you want a metal snare drum, then a Phosphor bronze is a really good place to start. So definitely recommend checking this one out. Okay, well I hope you enjoyed that review of the 7 snares from Natal. I certainly enjoyed it, and getting to play 7 different sounds in such a short space of time is really cool. But definitely go down to your local store and check them out. Look at them online as well and see what you look. Because of course, sometimes it can be the look that gets you, but go for the sound. And I hope you enjoy, but you'll certainly have fun playing them. I certainly have, and hopefully I'll see you very soon.